The transition from Rome as a republic to an empire was a long and epic journey. A story filled with conflicts such as Hannibal at the gates of Rome, the Macedonian Wars, the tyranny of Sulla, the emergence of Caesar and his campaigns in Gaul, followed by Octavian's inevitable crowning as Imperator. But for all of these epic campaigns to take place, Rome had to find its way through the turbulent times from when the Republic met its first real struggle. The rise of Rome and its inevitable domination over Italy, as you might expect, led them into conflicts with all kinds of cultures, such as the fierce Samnites to the south, the wealthy Etruscans to the north, not to forget the barbarian tribes from Gaul that inhabited the lands beyond them. However, even before these great powers ever were considered an enemy of Rome, the neighboring Veii of similar humble rule had served its opposition longer than most cared for. At least if you asked any citizen of these two settlements the Romans controlled back then. Hence Marcus Camillus, the Pater Familias of the House of Furia, that were almost seen as tyrants of the Republic, was granted the role of dictator, a title which granted great benefit to the beholder. After this appointment, he quickly took command of Legio Prima Italica, the only army available, and massively enhanced its military strength. It was mostly comprised of people who bought their own equipment. Thus the army was quite varied in terms of armor, with only a few men of the elite being able to afford a chestplate, highly similar to the Greek hoplites. By the upcoming summer, after the Veii failed to take the port of Ostia, Camillus besieged the Veii capital, waiting for the newly formed Legio Gemina that was on its way to reinforce. However, they wouldn't get there in time before the Etruscan nation still laid out. The legion formed up in the standard spear front line, all waiting for the enemy to charge. Camillus himself led the cavalry out on a flanking maneuver. Here he waited for the hostiles to commit into combat, but after realizing the enemy skirmishers were about to cripple the Roman front line, Camillus ordered the spear units to charge. Once the two lines were locked together, Camillus fanned out his cavalry to perform rear charges all along the enemy back line. This effectively routed the entire Veii army, making it easy for the cavalry to hunt down the rest. Any survivors of the battle were enslaved. Once Legio Gemina arrived, the city was at first sacked, just to be further looted and occupied later. Camillus had proven himself a dread commander, and in principle finished the war with this single offensive. He would afterwards step down from his dictatorship, returning the Republic to its consular ruling system. Not that this changed the public opinion about the Furian family being tyrants. This basically left the Veii with a squashed army and no gold, as most of it came into Roman possession courtesy of the city being looted. This gold was spent on establishing trade deals with, for instance, the Sabines to the east and the Greek colonies in Campania. They were at war with the Samnites and desperately needed any assistance they could acquire. The Etruscan nation of Tarquina to the north refused any form of relations. Same could be said about the wealthy Carthaginian merchants from Africa. Both troubling signs that you probably can figure out what we're leading towards. But a more pressing issue came in the form of the Volsci, who tried to jump upon the vulnerable state this previous battle left the Roman army in. Hence a peace was quickly established with the Veii, letting them live so all the available soldiers could march south without worrying about Rome being attacked. The Italian Wars had begun. However, another major issue was tormenting Camillus and Prima Italica. Apart from the woeful economy limiting the size of the legion, a massive famine was disrupting any hope of replenishing the army. To make matters worse, the Volsci continued to increase their own numbers. Legio Gemina couldn't help out either due to the general feeling among the plebeians of Furian tyranny, leading to extreme unrest on top of what the famine already caused. It was only by merging the cohorts of Prima Italica and enlistment of the poorest proletari, who barely could afford any equipment, Camillus re-established something that resembled an army. To make matters worse, the Sabines to the east, who were a Roman trade partner, were defeated by the Umbrians, which thus posed a threat from the mountains. Only by the thinnest of margins was a second frontier avoided. With his army of peasants, Camillus marched out to deal with the invading Italians, to then quickly march south and counterattack. After all, an army of sheep could still pose a threat, with a lion leading them. Also, the Umbrians actually turned out to be a more reliable friend than the Sabines, as they genuinely helped out with the rebellions troubling Roman lands. During this time, a man accused of killing a Carthaginian official offered a large sum of gold in exchange for sanctuary, something the Romans were more than willing to give due to the previous failed negotiations. The Carthaginians saw this as a major insult. But hey, they started and now we gain 2,000 denarii for the dried up Roman treasury. On the front line, Camillus and the Proletari attacked the Volsci commander trying to muster an army just outside the city of Antium. However, he was quickly reinforced by the town, turning this into a more difficult battle than initially intended. While the more disciplined units slowly advanced, the Proletari charged straight into the Volsci forces. Despite massively outnumbering the opposition, their lack of proper armor or military training resulted in high casualties, and even some units routing entirely. However, through the presence of Camillus and the slingers flanking around the enemy lines to fire into the rear, a chain rout started to form. A feast for the Roman cavalry. Despite this battle showing the flaws of the peasant recruits, it was enough to seal this walled port settlement and loot it for any riches that could help better the unrest in Rome. Furthermore, the Roman scholars continued to develop the economic sphere, mainly with regards to trade and agriculture. But there was no time for administrative affairs, as the Volsci were on the brink of collapse, with the Frentani tribe already having taken Casinum, and now Rome just outside their last town. As you might expect, a town we, the Romans, wanted as our own. With the departure of Camillus and as a result of his treatment of the city, its citizens were on the brink of another revolt. To solve this issue, he appointed another member of the Furian family to administer the land, a task which he honestly performed quite well by forming an alliance with the neighboring tribe. However, this didn't solve the real problem, which was the tyrannic power the Furian family had over the Senate. This just made it worse, just like all the fame Camillus gained for barely taking the last Volsci settlement before the Frentani. This left the only other town outside of Roman or allied influence within this province known as Latium in the hands of this far-stretching Italic nation. It was a war Camillus desperately wanted to pursue despite the larger armies of the Frentani. However, for the first time the Senate managed to overrule Furian opinion, instead seeking to aid the Greek trade partners in Campania against their Samnite oppressors. A non-aggression pact and military access was quickly established with the Frentani, making any conflict with them unthinkable. By now, the Samnites owned most of Campania, meaning Roman intervention couldn't wait. Along with the breakthrough in disrupting Furian dominance, a notable politician of the Licinian family, Gaius Calvus, took command of Prima Italica. He quickly began mustering new troops to the army as a spy revealed a large Samnite force stationed at Capua, the town closest to the Roman border. With a lot more time on his hands, Camillus turned to subterfuge in order to silence an Aemilian politician who was a well-known pacifist and someone who loudly spoke out against Camillus' warlike personality and plans. Publius Catulus, the man in command of Legio Gemina, became the new paterfamilias of the Aemilian family. Although it was evident Camillus was behind the assassination, no one in the Senate cared to prosecute him, as this in general was seen as the greater good for Roman interest. By 394 BC, Gaius Calvus had strengthened the Prima Italica legion to such an extent that he felt confident on going back on the offensive once more. Legio Gemina, though of lesser strength, followed along as reserves. This was at the risk of the unrest back home potentially getting out of control, but its presence was deemed more important in the war against the Samnites. During their journey south, a Daunian diplomat came to us asking for an alliance, as they feared our growing interest in the south. We agreed to this, hoping they could secure control of the southern provinces, Calabria and Lucania for us. Once the Roman legions reached Samnite territory, no armies were to be seen. Calvus tried to raid the countryside, hoping to provoke the Italians into a field battle, but without effect. Instead, he could simply lead the army into Capua, defeat the smaller garrison, and take the spoils of war. This, however, was enough to bring forth the Samnite army, half of it encamped at a strong position nearby, and another further south. Fearing what could happen if the Samnites consolidated their forces, the Senate granted Gaius Calvus dictatorial powers, which he used to engage the fortified Samnites. Here he quickly overwhelmed the encampment before any reinforcements could arrive. Once the army was defeated, Calvus seized control of the fort and ambushed the other approaching Samnite army. One entire flank of the Samnites fled by the revelation of our superior numbers, meaning the main bulk of the elite infantry was encircled and destroyed. With the rapid advance of Prima Italica and Gaius Calvus, Neapolis was conquered. Through the city, we learned of an even larger Samnite army on its way north. Fearing an assault on the city, Calvus replenished Legio Prima Italica with the cohorts of Legio Gemina. No attack ever occurred. Back home, a criminal gang protected by a patrician was running rampant, destroying everything. Fearing the potential consequences our action could bring, we simply ordered Camillus to appease the plebs with a speech. A fool's hope for sure, that only served to anger the citizens. Camillus was definitely more of a military leader rather than an orator. Back south, eager to act while in possession of dictatorial powers, Calvus charged out, defeating the Second Samnite army in a swift maneuver which gave the Italians little time to react. Shortly thereafter, he advanced down to Poseidonia and defeated the last Samnite army, clearing Campania of hostile scum and saving the Greeks. Soon thereafter, the Samnite capital fell to the Dardanians, performing their task in securing the south. Campania was to become one of the more lucrative provinces of the Republic, with its main focus on supplying Rome with food for future wars. The age of famine from the start of this campaign was resolved. The public order issues, on the other hand, wasn't, especially with rumors going on about Rome running out of grain. However, with the conquest of Campania, Camillus decreed food aplenty to be given out to the people, aiding to content the plebs. The Italian wars were all but over, with Legio Gemina staying in Campania to safeguard this new valuable land. Gaius Calvus and whatever remained of Prima Italica returned back to Rome. Here they would rebuild and try to stabilize the nation. However, this was all but impossible, with the rich Etruscans to the north expanding into our sphere of influence. The Veii, whom we all but destroyed, had lost their final settlement with the Etruscan nation Tarcuna. And if this wasn't bad enough, they were also invading our Umbrian trade partners. If we didn't act, the Etruscans would surround Rome, putting us at their mercy. This simply couldn't happen. Without a complete legion, Gaius Calvus and Prima Italica attacked, assisted by the governor of Veii, to crush and defeat the Tarquinian forces, pushing them back out of our lands. Gaius Calvus and Prima Italica had effectively kicked the hornet's nest by performing this attack without being ready for it. The Roman Republic was in a dire state. The army wasn't at full strength, the economy was weak, the political scene unstable just like public opinion, and now the Etruscan Wars had begun. Unlike the Samnites, who were rather easily defeated by Gaius Calvus and Prima Italica, the nation of Tarcuna was going to be too much for them to handle on their own. Not only did they have a larger economy, which meant larger armies, but also they were favored by other external powers declaring war on us right before we could strike the final blow. Tarcuna was most likely going to defeat the Umbrians, our trade partners to our east, taking control of the mountains and opening up another front. However, this also left their rich core provinces within the plains right for us to exploit. This offensive was launched without the aid of Camillus, whose frustrations from being denied a war against the Frentani kept him away from the front line. This in turn also diminished the domination of the Furian family, although a great many of them were operating as governors throughout the Republic. As part of this new conflict, the Senate bestowed a series of objectives for us to complete, such as developing a new training reform and construct a new temple of Jupiter, both reasonable requests which would serve Rome greatly. We immediately took initiative on the reforms and began the construction in Latium, which struggled to abandon its Italic ways. Catullus tried to lead Legio Gemina out of the province, but quickly realized this was impossible without a rebellion rising in their absence. A series of governors were appointed along the coastal ports to help stabilize the province. Up north, after squashing a minor Veii rebellion, Gaius Calvus marched into Ostia, from where he would merge and reinforce Legio Prima Italica for a proper offensive, one that would drastically drain the Roman economy. With a reasonably drilled army from the training reforms, he besieged the Tarquinian capital. Every night he expected an army to break the fog of war and lift the siege. This fear eventually overtook Calvus, who ordered a bloody assault resulting in extreme casualties, but also a few walls to hide behind. From here he hired a couple of Etruscan mercenaries to assist in the war effort. The mercenaries were paid for by the Daunians, who despite their great progress in conquering the south asked for our support against a random Greek colony. Thinking nothing of it, we agreed to this, not understanding this inevitably would lead to a Greek warlord with a claim to the Macedonian Empire, which was yet to be formed, getting called over from Greece. An event we surely couldn't have foreseen. But Rome needed the denarii just like the cavalry, which the subdued allied tribes supplied us with. Not all that surprising, by 389 BC, Marcus Camillus was declared consul again with Catulus of Legio Gemina. With the recently appointed governors, it was now somewhat safe for Catulus to march north. Along the way, he would reinforce his army with more capable fighters. After a series of weeks awaiting an Etruscan counterattack, we discovered they were just one region away from reaching Rome through the mountains. This was both a serious threat, but also the catalyst for Calvus once again marching out expecting no armies were nearby. Except this quickly turned out to be false near Velusna. Just like he did against the Samnites, Calvus began raiding the countryside, hoping to lure the army away from the town. But instead ended up simply scoring a lot of loot and delaying the confrontation enough for Catulus to reach the north, which thus allowed Gaius Calvus to take on the Etruscan army all alone. This small trick evened the odds a bit. Despite our inferior infantry, the fact that we brought more cavalry allowed us to overwhelm their flanks and slowly take down one hostile hoplite unit at a time. This effectively allowed Catulus to storm the town and steal their gold. Here he established an auxiliary camp which would allow us to train any Etruscans willing to join our side in the conflict. However, that minor victory over the Tarquinian army only brought us into further danger, with a full-strength army within reach to counterattack. Furthermore, after getting rid of some Scythian slaves, many patricians threatened to break off from the state. Camillus had to pull a lot of strings to avoid further issues, which slowly began diminishing the Furian dominance over the Senate. This was also why Camillus began mustering a legion of his own named Victrix. After this, the victorious Gaius Calvus led Prima Attila down towards the coast, from where he would march north to conquer more land. Catulus, on the other hand, stayed behind to defend Velusna. However, his army was no match for the numbers sent against them. Despite some initial success through javelins and an attempt to encircle the enemy, our positions were overrun with the commander falling soon thereafter. This defeat quickly led to violent debates in the Senate, where one man eventually insulted the plebs. The only way to resolve the situation was by scolding the patrician, which led to some grumbling but nothing more. With the destruction of Legio Gemina, Camillus marched to Veii, from where he would recruit our former enemies into the army. This was quite controversial as these units mainly fought with swords and axes, rather than the standard spears. Once Legio Victrix was ready, Camillus led them out to avenge the fallen Romans, but feared a proper assault on the town, and thus decided to pillage the land instead, waiting for the reinstated Legio Gemina to muster more troops. Except there wasn't really time for this, as another Tarquinian army was approaching from the mountains. Camillus had to attack now. This was the first time in Roman history a full-out non-mercenary melee unit was deployed on the battlefield, a fact that over time would change the world forever. The swordsmen were placed on each flank, with one side heavily reinforced by all the Succi cavalry. This flank would in superior fashion overwhelm and destroy the Etruscans, basically saving the spear-wielding units that desperately fought in the middle. The swordsmen, despite their controversy, proved to be highly effective. Camillus, however, was tired after the last battle, and thus delegated the recapture of Velusna to the new commander, which resulted in quite a few casualties. So many in fact, the Etruscans immediately felt confident enough to counterattack. But unlike the last defeat, this time the Roman armies were led by Marcus Camillus himself. He left a small garrison within the camp, while he personally led the light infantry out against the Etruscan vanguard. They had no chance, meaning once the main assault unfolded, the swordsmen marched out to rapidly take down the enemy reserve units, making it possible to hammer into the blob of Etruscans from all sides, causing an immediate chain rout. Under the command of Marcus Camillus, the newly raised Legio Victrix was quickly becoming one of the most feared armies in all of Italy, famed for their formidable warriors. An army that after 3 successive battles now had to replenish. Due to a lack of Roman conversion speed around the border territories, this was only possible at Rome herself. Elsewhere, Gaius Calvus and Prima Metallica met little to no resistance during their march along the coast. And by the year 385 BC, after the conquest of Phalathri, formed a border with the Ligurians from the Po Valley. A warlike people that had begun expanding further south, and also shortly after establishing contact, declared war on us. This of course was a major problem, as both Calvus and Camillus were intending to limit the Etruscans to the Apennines by taking the last northern regions they controlled. Taking advantage of this sudden destruction, the Etruscans for the 3rd time attacked the region of Lusna. The by far inferior garrison was desperately holding on, fearing death was imminent. However, after discovering this attack, Camillus and Legio Victrix rushed back south, with the tyrant leading the cavalry in advance and the infantry close behind. In a highly coordinated manner, they demolished the Etruscans, taking down anyone in their way until the attackers were completely surrounded. It was a decisive victory. By returning to command, Camillus had effectively destroyed the Tarquinian armies. The success allowed him to push north and link up with Gaius Calvus to conquer Aritum, a Celtic stronghold located within the province of Tuscia. This was just the first step in driving the Celts out of Italy. During the early years of the Roman Republic, our ambitions didn't expand beyond Italy yet, but rather if we could secure control over the Celtic town of Pisa or even Luna, we would have a strong position from which to fend off the barbarians. This would allow us to pursue a more feasible goal, which was to establish hegemony over the Italian peninsula, and for that we had to push east. This was something our enemies continued to encourage, with now the Senones drawing their arms against us. However, as there was some distance between our two nations and due to the concentration of Roman forces at Velusna, Camillus chose to join them, while Calvus patrolled the north, seizing opportunities as they appeared. In order to unravel these moments of luck, agents were dispatched all along the northern border. He would soon be reinforced by his brother Publius and Legio Invicta, another unauthorized army, which drastically drained the treasury. With in principle 2 legions and a desperate need of gold, Camillus launched the invasion of the Apennines. He defeated the Spoletian garrison on the field, allowing him to enter the city unopposed. This sadly wasn't enough to balance out the economy. Taxes were raised to a historic high, causing massive unrest throughout the fast-growing republic. This was also why the following summer was immediately utilized to further confiscate the mountain settlements. These regions would over time prove to be highly rebellious, as you can see from this massive army right here, which Legio Gemini barely kept out. With the fall of Catullus, the paterfamilias of the Aemilian family earlier in this war, their desperation for peace once again took center stage. This was in straight contrast to our current development, meaning the province of Campania, our only source of food, was at risk of breaking away. The only way to solve the situation this time was by sending certain members out on diplomatic missions to, for instance, the Frentani. Unexpectedly, this was quite beneficial, as they handed over control of a random port along the eastern coast of Italy. Despite further taxation opportunities, this didn't help with our economy. The upkeep of the legions was exceptionally high, and we couldn't afford to spare any of them, as the Ligurians were amassing near Pisa. The Etruscan War, which in principle had been resolved by Marcus Camillus through his heroic victories over their expensive armies, was needlessly extended through the Celts invading from the north. This had opened up another front, and a highly vulnerable one at that. Initially, their raids were by the size of a leaf and thus easily dealt with by our garrisons, a fact they would learn from and over time consolidate their forces to gather much larger raiding parties. Over in the east, the last Tarquinian towns were defended by the Senones, another Celtic nation of warlike barbarians. Having them this close to our armies was kinda terrifying, as the invasion of the Apennines had diminished our manpower. Therefore, since our spies in the north couldn't see any signs of an immediate attack, Gaius Calvus was called over to join Camillus. This, however, didn't sit right with the rest of the elite, the two most powerful men in all of the Republic cooperating, that is. One man, Decimus Lucius, saw this as a ploy by the Furians to re-establish their tyrannic control over the Senate, which otherwise had devolved into a respectable state. Decimus Lucius thus broke off founding his own house and bought all the households of Tuscia. The raids of the Ligurians lowered the prices of these lands, making such a move possible. Camillus and Calvus's plan of a large battle at Iguvium was thwarted by a smaller fortification denying the two commanders from fighting together. Calvus, being in a more exposed position, went into hiding in the nearby forest, while Camillus laid camp just behind the Frentani fortification. However, as the Senones and Etruscans attacked the Frentani, who otherwise was seen as an honorable ally of Rome, Camillus refused to support them, instead letting the Frentani get wiped out. All because Camillus still held a grudge and a desire to seize their lands for the Republic. This attack by the Senones left the northern fort vulnerable, which Calvus immediately took advantage of, encircling the town, allowing Camillus to engage the now depleted Celts in the snow. Except this time Camillus followed up on his already unorthodox army setup with an equally unusual tactic. This recent invasion of the Apennines had led to many casualties among the patricians, and thus led to fewer elite reserves. For this reason, he reorganized his formation into 3 lines split between the 3 main social classes, with the more replaceable soldiers such as the poor proletari or mercenaries in front. After a minor skirmish taunting the Senones to charge, Camillus ordered the first 2 lines to form one solid block for the Celts to run into. Tactically, their only role was to exhaust the enemy, for when the feared Veii swordsmen who filled out the 3rd rank charged in. This way, their superior fighting skills both shocked and routed the enemy lines. Unfortunately for the Senones, the snow made it incredibly hard to flee. This unorthodox tactic employed by Camillus was frowned upon by the more conservative senators, who didn't understand it later would serve as inspiration for future commanders. At one point, a Carthaginian warship unlike any we were able to make dropped anchor in Ostia, parading the news of their overwhelming naval power, and asked to patrol our trade lanes. Having seen our rapid expansion over Italy from the sideline, they were clearly trying to intimidate us into keeping to our peninsula. This failed, of course, with us declaring we could fend for ourselves. Tension was rising between the two nations. Same could be said about the south, where our Daunian allies were slowly getting pushed out of Magna Graecia by the Greeks. This was a worrying sign, but required no immediate intervention just yet. We still had to focus on the Senones and the ever-worsening schemes by the Senate. The Celts had concentrated a huge army near our lands, but with both Legio Prima Italica and Victrix nearby, they attacked, united under the command of Camillus, who once again applied his new tactical formation. Camillus led the right flank while Gaius Calvus took up a position on the left. Upon their united march towards the camp, it became clear that the Celts would rather fight on the open field rather than behind their small barriers. We quickly figured out this was because the Senones tried to focus all their forces on the flank where Calvus was, avoiding to engage Camillus for as long as possible. The front line quickly became a complete mess, with entire units running from one side to the other, making the battlefield impossible to analyze. Amidst this chaos, a unit of hostile javelin men closed the gap between them and Gaius Calvus, who stayed just behind the left flank, inspiring morale for the highly pressured troops. He would quickly come under heavy fire and inevitably failed the throw of dice. Camillus, on the other hand, was winning in superior fashion on the right, slowly folding their lines in on each other. This would eventually rout the Celts that were fleeing back to the fort. However, they wouldn't get that far. Despite this massive victory over the Senones, the fall of Gaius Calvus shocked the Republic. The fact that they killed one of Rome's most powerful men placed a target on their back. Decimus Lucius, on the other hand, saw this as a step too far by Marcus Camillus, blaming his tyrannic ambitions for the incident. The province of Toscia thus broke off, forming their own state in the north. This now forced the two Roman armies to trek back west, where they within a year brought down the rebellious senator. This, however, would allow the Senones to recover from their former defeat, while also further depleting our own already struggling manpower. Camillus' reconquest of the west couldn't have occurred at a worse time than this. By the time he captured Phalathri, the Ligurians had gathered a massive raiding party just outside of Pisa. This basically meant that he and the depleted Legio Victrix couldn't move away without abandoning the town entirely, which was out of the question. The southern front too was heating up in equal manner. The Greek colony of Taras had now made so much progress in Magna Graecia that they were able to make raids into Campania. It became so intense that Publius Calvus, the brother of the fallen hero Gaius Calvus, was tasked to patrol the all-important farmland supplying our northern expedition. He and his unauthorized legion Invicta was initially intended to replace Camillus on the front line, so this Greek offensive was a major blow to the war effort. Camillus was now the only thing standing in the way of the Ligurians, meaning once they attacked, Camillus had to be proactive and strike down the first army before the larger corps of troops arrived. They were quickly encircled and defeated before the entire force turned to engage the second army. By this time our men were exhausted, with many close to routing. Only through the inspiring aura of Marcus Camillus was the army able to hold their ground. This heroic victory, along with the subsequent retreat of the Ligurians, led to Camillus pushing into Etruria. Legio Prima Italica had done the same over in the east, and would later replace Camillus on the Ligurian front, so Legio Victrix at last could replenish again. Back south, Legio Invicta, the army sent to relieve the garrisons of Campania, misunderstood who they were supposed to fight and thus accidentally launched an amphibious assault on the Greek-owned island. This was the first of its kind, and with many of the ships being more suited for trading rather than warfare. The Greeks sent out a fleet of their own to harass our landing, but was too slow, meaning most of the troops made their way further inland. From here the Romans had to defend from 3 separate directions, as the Greeks used their knowledge of the island to gain an edge. Despite this struggle, the Romans survived. With this mistaken enemy defeated, we secured full control over the province of Campania. This helped propel our economy into a surplus, basically solving the problems of these previous poverty-stricken years. Following this battle, Legio Invicta would begin their campaigns against the Greeks in Magna Graecia. By the year 377 BC, Marcus Camillus and Legio Victrix was finally ready to go on the offensive again, against the Senones. However, unlike last time, he now had to fight on his own, with Prima Italica being tasked to defend the border against the Ligurians out in the west. This basically meant he had to apply a more cunning approach, such as marching through the hills to reach this undefended town in the north, raze it to the ground, and retreat as soon as the Celts arrived. Once they were gone, Camillus would go straight back in with a basically replenished army and attack the Senones, not understanding this army he engaged was the most skilled warriors the Celts had to offer. Out of thin air, the Senones appeared from the bushes, charging into our unaware unit. Camillus had to continuously ride from one flank to the other in order to maintain morale. Nevertheless, the center eventually routed, leaving the army in tatters. However, Camillus withheld any thoughts of yielding, instead restoring morale to the fleeing units, and thus organizing a coordinated counterattack. The Senones, for the second time, almost killed one of the most powerful men in all of the Republic. Sadly for them, that wasn't to be, and with reinforcements from the south reaching Camillus, he could launch a full-on offensive against the last few Celtic towns in the east. The extended Etruscan War was finally over. Through these successes, Camillus once again became the supreme power in the Senate. And with more time on his hands following the victories over the Senones, Marcus Camillus began investigating rumors about the previous years of poverty was due to corruption amongst the Aemilian governors of the south. The claims quickly proved to be false, making the Aemilians condemn our willingness to doubt someone who was noble-born. They, along with the Claudians, a recently growing family in the Senate, now threatened to break off just like Decimus Lucius a few years prior. We tried everything to avoid another uprising, but following the death of an Aemilian tribune against the Senon rebel cell, it was too late. Despite their pacifist ways, the secessionists immediately sought the aid of the Greek powers of the south, and thus quickly became a threat to be taken seriously. They had but one request: the immediate banishment of the tyrant Marcus Furius Camillus. In response, 2 other members of the Furian family, who had served as governors near Rome, began raising 2 privately owned legions and marched south along the western coast of Italy. And while all of this was happening, Legio Invicta was holding the front line against the Greeks of Taras that were increasingly becoming a larger threat to the Republic. This just became more evident as Legio Invicta departed for Campania, which led to the Greeks seizing our outposts. The Republican armies progressively advanced through secessionist lands, but by this time the most influential members of the Furian family suddenly died of old age or poisoning. You can pick your own conclusion. And by the year 370 BC, Pluto came for the tyrant himself. With the death of Marcus Camillus, the Furian family slowly faded into the annals of history. This subsequently left a void in the Senate for other families such as the Servilii or Cornelii to take advantage of. Not wanting to see the Republic tear itself apart, the other families made peace with the Aemilians. Therefore was a more peaceful approach on securing the eastern coast of Italy implemented, slowly annexing the Frentani and Daunians into the Republic. The Senones, who up until now still roamed around in Italy, now fled back north, finally settling in Gaul near an insignificant city known as Alesia. The rise of the Republic not only served as a series of successive wars propelling Rome into power over Italy, but also foreshadowed the major political issues that continuously would torment the Republic throughout its existence. Many nations such as the Celts, Greeks or even Phoenicians prayed for our downfall. Unfortunately for them, the reign of Rome had just begun.